Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive industrial policy shakeup out of South Africa. And honestly, this is a move that reflects a massive shift in global trade as a whole. So let's jump right into these new steel tariffs, because it is a wild ride.
Okay, let's dive into this. 30%. No, you heard that right, 30%. The South African government just officially hiked its import duties on a whole range of steel products, right up to that 30% mark. To really put that into perspective, previous tariff levels for these materials hovered somewhere between 0 and 15%. So we are talking about doubling and in some cases infinitely increasing these duties. It's honestly one of the absolute strongest industrial protection interventions we've seen from the country in recent years.
So what exactly is this new emergency measure? Let's look at part 1, the Steel Tariff Shield. The International Trade Administration Commission, or ITAC, confirmed that these new 10 to 30% duties hit a highly specific list of foundational industrial products. We're talking flat-rolled iron, non-alloy steel, bars, rods, tubes, and pipes. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to us? Well, because these aren't finished consumer goods. You don't buy these off a shelf. These are literally the critical building blocks of mining, infrastructure, engineering, logistics, and construction. Raising the cost to import these materials, that fundamentally alters the baseline cost of building practically anything in the region.
Which brings us right into Section 2, the root of the crisis. Because to understand the cure, you got to understand how deeply this domestic sector is struggling, right down to partial closures by major players like ArcelorMittal South Africa.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale of the vulnerability. Check this out. Roughly 36% of South Africa's entire steel consumption is fulfilled entirely by imports. That means well over a third of the foundational metal driving the entire nation's economy comes from outside its borders. When domestic plants are closing their doors and you're that heavily reliant on foreign supply lines, well, you can imagine economic regulators starting to seriously sweat.
And the plot definitely thickens when we look at exactly where that 36% is actually coming from. Data from the South African Iron and Steel Institute shows a massive 73% of those imports are flooding in from just one place, China. So this policy, it's not just some broad generic tariff. It's a highly targeted strategic maneuver explicitly designed to shield the domestic industry from a massive concentrated surge of Chinese steel.
But it's absolutely vital to note that this tariff surge didn't just happen in a vacuum. It's not a sudden reflex. This 30% hike actually follows earlier, very specific anti-dumping measures levied against structural steel imports from both China and Thailand. What you really need to take away from this is that we're witnessing a deliberate, escalating pattern of protectionism. The government is essentially frantically trying to plug the holes in a sinking domestic industry.
To truly grasp what's going on, we have to look past the spreadsheets for a second. ITAC Chief Commissioner Ayabonga Kawe summed it up perfectly, saying, "The objective is to create enough operational space for local producers to reinvest and modernize their facilities instead of continuing with shutdowns and retrenchments." I mean, that humanizes the policy beautifully, doesn't it? The government's basically trying to buy time, creating an emergency window to prevent thousands of devastating job losses and somehow halt this industrial decline.
However, every shield casts a shadow. So let's move to Section 3, winners and losers, and the double-edged fallout of this massive policy move. So, the crucial point is this incredible dynamic. On one hand, we have the clear winners. Local steel producers get massive relief through reduced import competition and some much-needed pricing support. Organized labor wins too, since this intervention is aimed right at preserving those manufacturing jobs. But look at the other side. The losers here are the downstream manufacturers, companies in electronics, industrial fabrication, you name it. They rely heavily on imported steel to actually build their products. For them, a 30% tariff is a literal nightmare. It means an immediate, painful spike in their procurement costs.
Fortunately, the government isn't totally blind to this downstream pain. Regulators are trying to soften the blow. They've made adjustments to tariff rebate mechanisms for downstream processors. Basically, if you're a processor using flattened structural steel products, there are intricate rebate systems being tweaked to try and offset these new costs. It's an incredibly delicate balancing act within the supply chain, for sure.
Let's zoom out from South Africa for just a second, though. Moving into Section 4, a global protectionist shift.
And this brilliantly illustrates the tightrope Pretoria is walking right now, because this tariff sends a totally dual, completely conflicting message to international investors. On one hand, it screams decisive protection of strategic industries. It shows investors the government will aggressively defend economic resilience. But on the flip side, It instantly triggers major questions about rising input costs and long-term competitiveness. If you're an investor looking to build a manufacturing plant in South Africa that needs imported materials, this tariff immediately makes you stop and question your entire profit margin.
But we absolutely have to recognize that South Africa isn't acting in a vacuum here. There's a very clear, growing global playbook at work. As global trade competition gets fiercer by the day, governments everywhere are deploying tariffs, throwing around subsidies, aggressively defending their domestic manufacturing, and fighting back hard against massive oversupply from major exporting economies. Pretoria's move? It aligns perfectly with this new, highly interventionist global reality. So where does this actually leave us? Let's jump to Section 5, the ultimate test. Let's see how this builds a potential roadmap for success. For South Africa's industrial economy to actually benefit from this massive shock to the system, they absolutely have to nail a specific roadmap. Step 1, local producers must actually utilize this newly created protection window. Step 2, they have to use this breathing room to radically modernize their operations and improve their fundamental competitiveness. And Step 3, use that newly modernized capability to attract long-term investment. Which leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question. Will local producers actually modernize, or are they just going to rely on permanent protection? That is the ultimate test. If local steelmakers use this 30% tariff as a crutch without upgrading their facilities, the whole downstream economy is going to suffer higher costs for literally zero long-term gain. But if they use this operational space to innovate, well, this could be the exact shield South Africa needs to forge a dominant, self-reliant industrial future. It's a high-stakes economic gamble, and the whole world is watching to see how it plays out. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time.